All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Amy Souza, and you are watching me on my Known Heretic channel. And I am so excited to be here today with Coach Linda Blade. Many of you know her as Coach Blade on
Hi,
Twitter.
everyone.
She has a PhD in kinesiology. She's a sports performance coach. She's been to the Olympics, and she co-wrote this amazing book with Barbara Kay. If you can see this on my screen right now, Unsporting. Unsporting how trans activism and science denial are destroying sport. I love it.
We both have the book. I love it. Thank you.
And I was lucky enough to meet you, Linda, when we were in Atlanta together protesting at the NCAA swimming championship. So
yes,
that was a really pivotal moment. It was pivotal for me to be there. It was pivotal to meet you, but I think I feel really proud that, I feel that was sort of a pivotal moment in our history as well. And
it was.
This.
I like the idea that the last time I saw you, I was giving you a big hug in Georgia.
I know.
Yeah. We were protesting, weren't we? We were out there making our voices heard.
Yeah,
that was the important thing.
Yeah, it was really important. And, to be there and to be with the athletes, it was great to be there with Beth Stelzer and Save Women's Sports and to meet you and see Colin Wright there and, Coach Fossey as well, and all of the amazing athletes, and to, be able to sort of stand there and have the public record, sort of see, we don't consent to this. There are people who disagree with this.
Absolutely. It was blatantly clear what was going on, and it wasn't right. And no male should be allowed to compete with women. And we were there to express those concerns, for sure.
Yeah. And you were also, as we spoke about earlier, you were meant to be at the Icons conference in Nevada today.
Yes.
Today. So everyone who doesn't know, they're recording it, and you can go back and watch that conference later. But it's all about the sports.
It's beautiful, and you know what I love about it is that it's the mothers of the swimmers, the Ivy League swimmers that were, disenfranchised. Those are the ladies now standing up and leading this new group to stand up for Title IX. And I'm so happy and grateful to those women who, finally there's, realizing. I knew they'd do something eventually. They were upset, and I knew they were. And this is a great outcome to do something positive, to stand up for women's rights in sport. Female athlete needs to be defended. That category needs to be defended. Yeah. That was what Title IX was about. So I'm glad that they're coming together as women from all over and really making their voices heard.
Yeah. So, I want to talk about the FINA ruling, and I want to talk about, I guess, what it is. But I also, I guess, this is a little preemptive, but how much do you think the mothers had, like, how much do you think their involvement and their pushback had to do with FINA changing their ruling on this?
Well, the FINA ruling is amazing. It's huge because it's the first, other than World Rugby in 2020, but it's the first major Olympic sport to push back against what the IOC had allowed to happen. The Olympic Committee had allowed to happen in 2015 and even 2003, allowing males to self-declare as women and come into the women's category. And so, I don't know whether the Icons pushback is because of FINA. It was going on right after the, Leah Thomas affair, the NCAA's. And it's really good timing that the FINA ruling happened the week before the Icons conference. And the only reason I can't be there is I have passport issues, but, so I'm a Canadian and I couldn't get across the border. So
Well, we're gonna get you back here.
sorry about that. Can
Uh,
you fix that in your final?
yeah,
Final, sorry.
I can fix it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So tell for people who don't know, what is FINA, and tell us about what the ruling said.
Okay, so the ruling of FINA said, and I'll read it verbatim: male to female transgender athletes, transgender women, and athletes with 46 XYDSD, which are the intersex males, whose legal gender and or gender identity is female, are eligible to compete in the women's category in FINA competitions and to set FINA world records in women's category in FINA competitions and other events recognized by FINA if they can establish to FINA's comfortable satisfaction that they have not experienced any part of male puberty beyond Tanner stage 2 or before age 12, whichever is later. Specifically, the athlete must produce evidence establishing that they have complete androgen insensitivity. In other words, their body doesn't respond to testosterone, which is the case with a lot of some intersex, and whether and to show that if they are male and they are androgen sensitive, that they have never gone through male puberty. And then if they have sensitivity but they had androgen suppression from before puberty, then they have to keep their testosterone down to 2.5 nanomole per liter throughout their life, throughout their competitive life. So yeah. So it's basically barring any male who has gone through puberty, pretty much, to be in women's sports.
So I know when we were in Atlanta and I saw Leah Thomas on the news after Atlanta, he said, that was his plan. He wanted to go to the Olympics, and that was one of his whole points in wanting to compete. So now, now he's out.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he would be, because he went through male puberty, and you can see he's got the shoulders. I mean, he just looks like a man. And
He's a man.
He is a man.
He's like a giant, like
man.
6'4" man.
He's a giant 6'4" man who identifies as a woman, and for whatever that's worth in society, you can't do this in sports. You have to compete with your body, and in many other ways, there's probably an allowance where you can be well respected in society and identify any way you want. But in sports, you're going to have to compete with your body, which is a male body. You can't get around that. He can't get around that.
Yeah. I was thinking, like, you spent so much time writing an entire book, explaining how men and women are different and why men have an advantage. And I mean, it is obviously an accomplishment, but I also imagine that it's sort of frustrating to have to go to that depth to explain to people what we can ultimately see with our own eyes.
Yeah, it's really frustrating, but at least in my case, I understood, and Barbara Kay is the journalist who talked me into writing it and agreed to be my co-author. Barbara Kay understood that this was going to be part of a grand sociocultural conversation for a long time in this country and throughout the world. And she wanted me to establish in a book, sort of for your soccer moms, hockey dads, something in easy to read and explaining where this all came from, what does it mean, and how do you make sense of it? Because our hope always has been that if you can make sense of what's going on in people self-IDing and know the difference between biological sex and gender identity and the fact that sex still matters, I think that gives people courage, whether you're parents in a school board, gives people permission, in a sense, and confidence to just speak up and just tell the truth and say, no, I don't agree with this. Like, I think people get quite intimidated, Amy, by just the confusion that the new lingo and the language and how you're supposed to twist yourself around into knots to not, you know, to not disrespect somebody. And we all want to be nice. You don't want to disrespect anybody. And so I think people, you know, at ground level need to have a book that helps them understand where's, you know, what are we talking about here and what's the reality. And so you know, I don't regret the fact that in some ways that we have to keep talking about it and reestablishing these principles and the truth time and time again,
Yeah.
because there's always a new group of people that needs to hear it because they weren't paying attention to it 5 minutes ago, including these women that started the icons. They will admit they weren't involved in this debate at all until their daughters, you know, were suddenly subjected to this humiliation.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you get a chance to talk to some of the athletes when we were in Atlanta?
I didn't actually get to talk to any. I was there that, as you know, the one day, the Thursday when Leah Thomas won the 500, and then I had to get back to my family. So I wasn't there the entire championship, but I did see it with my own two eyes, and was able to speak at the Save Women's Sports podium that day.
Yeah, you were great.
Well, it's just amazing, you know, how all through history, and that was my message. My all through history, they always knew what a woman was, and we weren't allowed to do things, or not allowed to vote, or not allowed to work. And all of a sudden, they act like they don't know what a woman is anymore. You know, it's just like it's so disingenuous. It's crazy, and we all know it. It's just it's a political movement and actually a sort of pseudo religious ideology that somehow we're all just supposed to suddenly accept.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you know what? I mean, it is so frustrating because it is just yeah, conceptual and ideology. It's a
Hmm.
belief system that it's
Yeah.
sort of you know, I've been starting to call it sex denialism. I mean, it's
Hmm.
just, you know, denying our sort of lived embodiment. And, you know, one of the things that I've been thinking about and I wanted to put to you, because ultimately, you know, elite sports is
Hmm.
is about honing your body and pushing yourself and you know, really honing almost everything in your life, like your diet, your sleep habits. I know I've heard there are athletes who like kind of like try to find the best pillow so they can have optimal sleep and you
Yep.
know do yoga and different you know activities. So you're honing and honing and honing and honing to push your body to its absolute maximum.
Hmm.
So why would it possibly be fair for men to take decreasing drugs? They take they're purposefully making their body
Hmm.
less performative. They're purposely holding back. So it's
Yeah.
like you're swimming with one hand tied behind your back, but at any moment you could stop taking those performance decreasing drugs that hinder
Hmm.
you and be
Yeah.
at your maximum performance. So everyone knows you are not at your body's maximum performance. So to me, it doesn't taking performance decreasing drugs, it doesn't make it fair. It just sort of makes a mockery of everything that elite sports stands for.
Well, it's an insult because what it's saying to the women is that female athletes are just male athletes. It's basically male athletes that are just much less accomplished, so that a male athlete has to handicap himself or like almost like tie one hand behind his back in order
Yeah.
to just sort of, you know, give us a fair chance. And
Yeah.
I just find it really demeaning because it's not that way at all. We're two completely distinct designs. So when we talk about sexual dimorphism, we are talking about, you know, morphology. So
Yeah.
morphology, sexual dimorphism, morphology means we have two distinct morphologies. In other words, the shape and design of a vehicle or a body. So, and of course, I always make the analogy, if you're talking about racing cars, you have you have categories for different designs. So you have the Formula One vehicle has one kind of design, and you have the NASCAR, stock car, whatever, is another kind of design, not as sleek, not as, and people would go ballistic if you tried to justify, you went to a NASCAR race, all of a sudden somebody decides they're going to put a Formula One car in there. They would go crazy. And yet the differences between males and females is far more distinct than the difference between a Formula One car and a NASCAR and a stock car. So, it's crazy. Like we all know that there are categorical distinctions in sport in many ways. You look at the Olympic sailboat race, how many different kinds of sailboats? And they're all distinct forms and designs. Well, I would say just like that, male and female are distinct design. And no matter how much you try to throttle down the male design, it's still a different design and must be in a different category. And just conceptually, there's no meaning to it if you're going to stick a male athlete, no matter how handicapped that person becomes in terms of reducing their performance. It has no meaning when that person is suddenly in the female race. I mean, what is the meaning of that competition at all? So you're robbing the female athlete. You're first of all insulting us by saying, oh, you're so much better than us that you need to tie a hand behind your back to compete with us. And then on top of that, you're basically undermining the very meaning of the competition for us.
Yeah.
So just even from those philosophical points of view, it shouldn't be happening.
Yeah. And, I hear this is something I mean, I know a little bit about, but I'm sure you can speak more to it, because I think that a lot of the sort of layperson think that it's just a testosterone level, and that if you can sort of decrease your testosterone, then, if you're a man who calls himself a woman, then you're fine. You're sort of, now you've leveled the playing field.
Yeah. Well, that was the quick fix that the transgender activists had brought to the IOC secretly. Of course, whenever all these kinds of conversations happen about eligibility, at least in the past 20 years, it never involved the female athletes. It was always the transgender person or the male who wanted to self-identify, who all of a sudden was the one in the medical commission at the table with the IOC saying, this is how we can make it fair. And the IOC took it on face value when Joanna Harper said, oh, all you have to do is reduce the testosterone and everything will be equivalent, and produced a very poorly designed research study of 8 male athletes to kind of prove this. And it was so shoddy, the research. It was shocking that the IOC Medical Commission would even accept such a thing. And yet, when you think about that, it almost makes me more irate than anything to think that a flawed scientific, and it wasn't even peer-reviewed, study of only 8 male runners who transitioned can change the rules for all the female athletes in the whole world. Eight
Yeah.
males, being measured in their running performance before transition and after transition, and watching how performance maybe drops after transition to somehow justify that would allow them to fit in with female category. And and the one runner number 7, that person actually increased their speed after they transitioned. So it was going against the narrative
Wow.
that you am I gone? Sorry. So
You're
that
there.
person actually increased their I'm here. So the person actually increased their running speed after transitioning. So would their performance would have been even greater against female athletes. And guess what? Joanna Harper treated that like that was an outlier and left that out of the averages of comparing before after. So even within the limited database that Joanna Harper had to prove this point, he had to take out one of the subjects to prove that that when you take testosterone, you actually get slower. If you had kept that data point in there, it would have been consistently above the speed would have been higher than the females all the time, no matter what.
Wow.
So they had to remove a data. They had to cheat to even show that difference, right? And so
Wow.
it was flawed all the way through. And I have a little website just to explain that point called N equals 8, just because
Okay, good to
8
know.
men
Okay.
and yeah, N equals 8.com. But I mean, it's just so silly. I mean, it's amazing that all of the global sports, the massive Olympic sport governing body, would accept one flawed study of 8 men to change all of the rules for that would affect every female athlete in the world.
Wow. Wow.
It
Do you think
blows my
oh,
mind.
yeah, it blows my mind. I mean, it's really insane and just like so frustratingly unfair. I mean, just
Mm-hmm.
ugh. Like I mean, I can't imagine if I was a young woman, who had trained my whole life, and it's just devastating and beyond frustrating.
Yeah, and it is. It's devastating, but we're fighting back now because now we know. We didn't know in those days that somebody was in the back room arguing against our interests and we didn't have a say.
Will the FINA ruling affect the rest of what the IOC does? Will that have impact, or will each sport get to decide?
Yeah, so after a bunch of blowback after like in 2021 after um, the Olympics and Laurel Hubbard had been involved in the women's weightlifting and there was a big outcry. The IOC basically said, well, obviously something's wrong with our policy. We're going to have to review it. And so basically, right after the Olympics, some of the women involved in this movement, whether it's Save Women's Sports, like Beth Stelzer or like Catherine Deves in Australia and Fair Play for Women in the UK, we all started noticing trans activists were bragging that they were now being consulted again by the IOC about how to change or make the policy more suitable. And once again, the women were being left out because we didn't know who are the women who are who are representing our voice at the table, right? So Catherine Deves in Australia, I'll get to the answer to your question, but
Okay.
Catherine Deves in Australia, Save Women in Sports Australasia, had wrote a letter. She's a lawyer. She wrote a letter to the IOC saying, "Who are you actually listening to females this time? Women in sport? Are you actually consulting with women now that you're reviewing your 2015 policy that is allowing self-ID?" And and she got an abrupt response, which is in itself a miracle because the IOC never seems to acknowledge women at all. But she at least got an answer that by early September saying, consultations are closed. We've already consulted with groups like yours. Well, that was weird because none of us had ever heard of any of the other women that we know being consulted. So then I just took it upon myself to compile a big email list of all the groups of women that are around the world that I know of, like Fair Play for Women, Save Women's Sports, Champion Women in the United States, the Martina Navratilova group, like all the different groups. I basically just sent it out there and said, this is what the IOC has said about September, August, July, August 2021. Have any of you been consulted? And if so, what did you say? Because we women would like to know what you're saying on our behalf. Like, what is the position you're expressing? Okay. So all of them wrote back and said, nope, didn't talk to us. So it was pretty clear across 7 countries that the IOC had not consulted people like us. They were lying. And so it was not surprising that in 2021 in November, so later, 2 months later, the IOC comes up with its new guidance on transgender, which was to kick the can down the road and say, well, after the Olympic Committee created this problem, now they're saying, well, we don't want to deal with it. It's really up to each sport. So basically they just passed the buck. And that's why FINA had to rule this year, because Now it's up to swimming all alone, and World Rugby and FIFA soccer has to figure out their own policy, and track and field now has to. But so thank goodness that FINA has ruled this way, because the IOC has already said they're just going to go by whatever the individual sport federations, global sport federations, say about their particular sport. And now, because of FINA, I think World Track and Field is going to review their policy, hockey, so ice sports, rowing. There's a bunch of sports now that are going to just follow suit and look at their policy. So, and the fact that FINA did such a fine job, although you and I understand there's a glitch, but they did such a fine job in terms of the language being clearer here. I think a lot of sports may just go ahead and follow the FINA ruling, because it's really the same thing. It's a sex-based sport. Sex determined, sex does make a difference in this sport as far as power and speed. So why would any or other organization have to reinvent the wheel? FINA has invented it here, and it really looks great in that sense. Let me add one more thing though to that. That group that we were in this email group, we realized if every single sport is going to now have to go through a consultative process on its own, there needs to be a group, international group of women that's recognized as the voice for women. And so we have continued with that group. And about 2 weeks ago, or in response to FINA, we've announced the fact that there is an international consortium on female sport. And we are like, yeah. So any group we have 7 countries involved: Spain, France, UK, United States, Canada, New Zealand, Australia. And any time that a global sports organization wants to have women at the table, we do have a common statement of position that now represents all of what we can all agree to, which took a long time. It took a long time to come up with a statement that we can all agree to.
Yeah.
And Icons is sort of the USA, a new group within the USA, within the collegiate level and in Title IX. But some of the women on the Icons group are part of our consortium. So we have now an international level group that can send a representative to any sport governing body table. Good. To now speak on behalf of women and girls in sport. And good. Carry the same message. It's all aligned with Icons and Save Women's Sports. And for all of these groups, we have a common position, basically to protect that every sport, no matter what other categories you want to develop, but there has to be one category that's dedicated to the female athlete. And that's really what we're saying. That's what we're saying. Yeah.
Will this will the FINA ruling affect collegiate sports? I mean, will rulings that these bodies make affect collegiate sports also?
Well, they will have to, I would say, because when we started to speak out against Leah Thomas after that first race in the Ohio meet where Leah Thomas won by almost 40 seconds, that was in December, and then, or late November, whatever. And then the hue and cry went through Christmas, if you can recall. And then in January of this year, there was a lot of pressure being put on the NC2A to say something. And they, I think it was the last day, and one of the last days in January, the NCAA did say we're going to rely on Swimming USA Swimming for whatever policy we go forward with. And USA Swimming has to follow the FINA policy. So it's FINA, the international governing body, then the rule trickles down to USA Swimming, and then finally down to NC2A, because NC2A made the commitment, unless they change their mind, but the NC2A has made the commitment to follow whatever USA Swimming says, and USA Swimming has to follow suit with FINA. Otherwise, none of their times, or the whole point in being an association is to actually qualify athletes for an international and world competition. Yeah. And if you don't follow a policy, that makes all of your athletes in your country ineligible. So why would USA Swimming have any different approach than FINA? Like, FINA is their governing body internationally. So it makes sense to me that it would trickle down to the NCAA without question.
I think you're right. And I have a question. I have two questions, but I'm gonna save the juiciest one for last, I think,
Okay.
or for later for a minute. But I know that they said that uh they can start their own league
Mm-hmm.
for men, who want to participate as woman gender. Uh okay, I guess it's a two-part question because one, do you think that allocating funding for that will also take away funding? Um, I know sometimes it's harder to get funding designated for women's sports
Yeah.
at the collegiate level. And do you think that's going to take funding away from women? Uh,
Yeah.
and two, are the women who, because one of the things that I thought was, well, first I'll ask that question, then I'll ask the other question.
Well, I think in sport, we're dealing with it right now in Canada too, like every country. Uh, when we have national meetings, like I'm president of track and field in Alberta, and we go, of the province. So all the provinces get together at the national meetings. And my meeting back in May, it was very clear that everybody's cash strapped, and if you're going to have a third category, um, it does take, you instead of splitting the pot in two, half and half for male and female, now you're splitting it three ways. So that means if most of the athletes going into a third category will probably end up being male, at least the winners will be, because even if trans identified female athletes, females who want to identify as men, if they go into a third category, they won't win against the male to female, like the men who identify as women. So it'll just be two groups of men winning different categories, and then a third category that's for women. So we're going to be having a lesser piece of the pie in
Yeah.
that sense.
Yeah. And you kind of answered what I was going to say, but like, for example, one of the things that I thought was so weird and frustrating just even if you take sort of the other side as a given and listen to the TRAs. So Leah Thompson competed against Isaac
Hennig,
Hennig.
Hennig.
Hennig. Sorry, Hennig. And one of the things was I was like, well, if he's so dysphoric, competing against quote men, then why is he fine being in a competition with this woman who says that she's a man? So, do you think that the women who are claiming special identities are still going to compete with women? Or are they going to try and open their whole own competitive field?
Very few women who identify as men want to compete with the men because they know they won't win. Those who have done that, you got to take your hat off. At least they're walking the walk. If they
Yeah.
call themselves men, they want to compete with men, and they do compete with men. Chris Mosier and the one from Harvard. But I mean, there's very few that have done it, and they don't win. So most of in our experience, most of the female people who are identifying as men stay with the women in the women's sports, and they don't take transition drugs like testosterone until they're finished competing because they know that will be doping. So basically, maybe someone will undergo the surgery. I think Isaac Hennig did, like top surgery or whatever. But basically, just competing with the women, and we
Yeah.
don't know. Nobody has a problem with that. And here's the interesting thing, Amy. It does raise the question if female to man trans person who's a female and just identifies in a different way or non-binary, if they're happy pretty much accepting to stay in the women's category, why can't men who identify as women just stay in the men's category? The women are doing it, the females
Yeah.
are doing it. So
Yeah.
really, when it comes to trans in sport, that's why I disagree with headlines saying banning trans in sport. We're not banning. We have a lot of trans in women's sport, and we accept them because they're female to male, right? So they are female. They're female and trying to pretend to be male. So we don't have any problem with that. So we're not anti-trans at all. I mean, it's basically, we're just saying we want to have a category where this type of body, no matter how you identify, competes together. And so the only thing left is this, all of these changes in rules and policies pertain to half of the trans population, or less than half, which are the male to female.
Yeah.
And those are the ones, the men, who want to just wedge themselves into women's sports when they already have a category they can compete in. So we're not banning, it's fully inclusive. They can just stay with the men, or we can just change, if it hurts their feelings to call it men's sport, we'll call it open, right? Like,
Well,
that's what I said in my book. We can have a female only category, and then an open category where you can be, if you're a male, male to female, female to male, all the other types who have other identities, they can compete in an open category, and
yeah.
it's 100% inclusive.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and
Yeah.
I mean, that's what always kills me. Like there is no banning. No one has ever been banned. No, that's such a
No.
disingenuous propaganda slogan, because no one was ever banned. Everyone has
It's a
always,
feel sorry for me. Feel sorry for
yeah,
me slogan. I'm
yeah.
so banned. No, you're not.
Yeah, no one was ever banned. The teams that are sex segregated have always been open to anyone of any, so-called claimed identity. So those
Yeah,
teams were always open,
that's right.
from the
And
get-go.
that's
And
so, yeah, it's weird.
and isn't it true, because I know this is true, like for American football, the
Mhm.
professional leagues are technically open leagues for all sexes, the men's leagues, because
Well,
we've
it's that.
seen
That's it.
every once in a while you see a female soccer star being a kicker, at
Hmm.
an NFL league. So
Hmm.
those teams are completely open to all sexes.
Yeah, professional men's sport is open. So basically, if you were a female in NHL, NBA, NFL, Major League Baseball, golf, PGA golf, any of those sports that are, you see on TV all the time, if they were, if you were a woman, a female person, and you were good enough to compete with those guys, you would be right there competing. Like, there's nothing stopping. That is the open category, and it's pretty instructive how few women you see competing in any of those, because there's a vast difference between men and women.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
Okay, so and now the question I wanted to ask, earlier, we talked a tiny bit about it. So the ruling says that you cannot compete if you have been through male puberty, past Tanner stage 2, or the age of 12,
Hmm.
whichever comes first. And do you think this will incentivize parents putting their kids on puberty blockers?
Um, my first thing is, I hope not, because that's destructive to a young body. And I think FINA was trying desperately, as soon as people started worrying about this, that fact that it might incentivize people to transition children before the age of 12. Their point was, this was a rule that had in mind mostly the 46 XYDSD intersex type people who, males, people born male, but for whatever reason have zero androgen insensitivity or very low androgen insensitivity. So, as you probably know, like in human biology, female is your baseline body. And if you add testosterone, you have an XY chromosome, you add testosterone in the womb, that's what differentiates the body into male. So if there's no sensitivity to androgen, like some males have zero, they're complete androgen insensitive, and so they have a female sort of template when they come out of the womb. They look kind of female, and I think this entire ruling was sort of aimed at them, like, or those with very low sensitivity who still are very effeminate and
Mhm.
might, but as long as they've made the decision as intersex to remain, to present as female, they would be taking low, like reducing and making sure there is never a testosterone that comes into that system before the age of 12. They, that was, you know, a sort of special medical, you know, disorder of a sexual development case. So, I mean, there's a very small, and I think they were talking to that case. They weren't
Yeah.
talking to normal boys who might just want to suddenly identify or have a future where they could have an advantage in sport.
And, you know, I don't know if this is, I don't remember, I don't know if this is in your purview, but,
Mhm.
you know, aren't there, I mean, there's still some male advantages from just having like a male skeletal structure. So it's
Yeah,
not all puberty
yeah,
because they're not
it's not puberty.
their hips
Yeah.
aren't going to splay, and there
Mhm.
is still going to be male advantage there.
Yeah, and for me, I wouldn't not have put that Tanner stage 2 or anything like that in there because for in my opinion, and I've studied, I mean, part of my PhD was looking at size, shape, and proportion composition, even pre-puberty versus post-puberty in terms of sport performance, and size and just body shape. And it's very clear to me, even as a coach, that little boys do have a competitive advantage over little girls, even pre-puberty. And the XY, the Y chromosome, and SRY gene carries with it all kinds of little, you know, nuanced biological features and physiological anatomical things that make
Yeah.
that body still much different than a female body. And it's interesting because I brought this point up at our Athletics Canada meeting a month ago, that right now World Track and Field has a rule because Nike has this Vaporfly running shoe that seems to be giving people an advantage, men, like the within the men's marathon, the men who get to wear the Vaporfly are 4% faster than the men who don't wear it.
Wow.
So that running shoe gives men a 4% advantage. It's become established that it does give them. And originally it was only the guys who were highly sponsored, like the top sponsorship athletes of Nike were getting this shoe, and nobody else was allowed to get that shoe. And so because of a 4% difference, there is a now this year a new rule about the shape and composition and the diameter, sort of the dimensions of a running shoe, to because
Wow.
men, some men were being you know, disadvantaged compared to others because of this running shoe. Well,
Wow.
guess what? Little boys, you know, when we look at the charts of before pre-puberty, what happens is the difference between children, male and female children, is actually a 5% difference, and then it extends to these like 10, 12, 20, 50% after puberty. So the
Wow.
baseline difference between boys and girls is still 5%. And people act like that's, you know, that's negligible. But if a 4% difference makes a difference within the men's category, they think they're being cheated because of a running shoe, then it's still 5% difference. That's still significant for a little girl to have to compete with a little boy. You're talking the same number, like disadvantage. And somehow people are pretending like, well, you know, with children, it's only a 5% difference. Well, it's still a big difference.
Wow.
And you know, so I'm just making the point, you have to be consistent. If you say you're going to make a whole rule based on a 4% advantage
Yep.
about a running shoe,
Yeah.
and you can't act like this like a 5% difference between boys and girls is negligible.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, and you know, and then not to mention just, you know, girls should get to play with girls just because, you know,
Yeah,
just to,
well, how about the preference? How about the psychosocial preference of a girl? Like, are you not asking the little girls, what would you prefer? Would you want to run with the little boys, or would you rather just run with each other? Like, people never seem to think that that matters, that there's this template, these little girls, this entire group, that, you know, that somehow you can make a decision about their conditions of competition, uh, without ever considering whether that would be in any way psychologically demeaning to them.
yeah.
It's just once more ignoring the plight of the female person.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really, I mean, ultimately, it's very demoralizing how, I mean, you can see the sexism in the
Yeah,
way that
absolutely.
men's preferences and their feelings are taken into account. And one of the most horrifying things, this is not, I guess, about sports, but it's about sex. But one of the most demoralizing things, I thought, for those NCAA swimmers were to have to share a locker room
Uh,
with Leah,
Disgusting. Yeah, yeah.
and they were very uncomfortable, and no one cared that counts as sexual harassment.
I mean, I mean, this is the thing that these mothers, that are the icon women. This one of the major things is it's almost, well, it's illegal in some states to even allow that to happen. It's
Yeah,
illegal because it's a sexual crime to
yeah,
have to have a male strip in your presence, unwanted,
yeah,
and it's exhibitionism and all that. And so, I mean, you come on. We all know the truth. That's disgusting, and
yeah,
and shame on Ivy League for supporting and promoting that. Shame on them.
yeah, yeah.
Criminal. It's criminal.
It is criminal. And I notice, of course, now we're seeing a lot of these men. I don't know why all these men are getting interviews about this issue.
Mm-hmm.
I saw Hannah Mounsey got a whole interview about this ruling. And I was like, what why are you asking him? Why does he get his whole own interview about this? You
You
know?
know what? In Canada, Fallon Fox got interviewed on our national program, our national broadcaster, without interviewing a single woman about this. Fallon Fox, the guy that beat up a woman, crushed her skull in the boxing ring, and somehow that's going to be the guy that's your hero that you're going to go to get a comment on this on FINA.
It's real.
It blows your mind.
It's
It's just
insane.
like what?
It's
What?
insane. I mean, the sexism, I don't see how people don't see it. How are you missing this? It's in your face. It's in your
Mm-hmm.
face.
Yep.
Oh my gosh. Well, I wanted to ask, so I wanted to push a little bit more into this
Sure.
Tanner question, because
Mm-hmm.
you were participating in the Olympics around the time where, like, the Russian teams were doping and taking
Yep.
testosterone. And I mean, I could see, I don't necessarily know if it would happen here in the United States, but I could definitely see that countries who run their programs, like that, would
Mm-hmm.
take advantage and push boys to, be on puberty blockers. And I know even gymnasts have been on puberty blockers to keep them from developing. I think that's true also.
Yeah, I don't know. It's very concerning to me. I think um well, it's funny because when I was doing my own study in sport sciences, my big concern of growth and development of children in sport was the for example, Bulgarians giving their children, and especially their little boys, testosterone to perform better at a younger age. So in other words, if you do the opposite of what I can answer your question, but to do the
Yeah,
opposite,
yeah,
if and we see this in junior highs and high schools, because in the United States and Canada, many parts of the Western world, because there is a prevalence of being able to access testosterone for like in the fitness clubs, there are coaches that will try to encourage the boys to take a little testosterone here and there to beef up. And what you're doing when you do that is you're accelerating the closure of the growth plates in the bones. So what happens is if you get excessive muscularity before your bones have finished elongating and growing, you end up closing that little plate where the length comes from in the bones. So basically if you do that and you beef up too young, and you probably everybody knows this, the muscly boy in junior high ends up being very short, small man. So um, I think that kind of doping in the young athlete is nothing but trouble, because that athlete will never grow to their full body size. But on the other hand, trying to anticipate whether you want to have your son identify as a girl and not go through puberty and then transition that child, to me, that's unethical. It should never happen, because you're going to make that child sterilized. First of all, you're going to sterilize that person. They will never have children. To me, that's horrifying. And the other thing about it is that if you, like the little girls now, who, if there are some sports that they delay puberty, what's going to happen is it always ends up hurting your bones. Like, you have less bone density, and like, anytime you delay puberty, you're delaying something very valuable that the body needs to survive to its full 80 to 100 years.
Yeah.
And those little girls are going to be getting osteoporosis. Instead of, your bones breaking at age 80, they probably be breaking at age 50. And we just don't want to see that happening. Like, all the studies show that especially for little girls, putting calcium in your bones, like bone mineral content, it's like money in the bank. You can only put in so much density. The density builds up only to a certain age, like somewhere in your mid 30s. And it's like a bank account. So you build up bone density to about 30, 35, 40 maybe. And then after that, everybody goes downhill in terms of your density. But if you've started high with a high bank account of bone density, and you go down the same rate as everybody else, but you're still pretty high at age 80 and 90 because you were active and you were healthy, and you had a good diet, and you ate, right, milk and calcium and all that. About 50%, about 30% of all the bone density you're ever going to have in that bank account of bone mineral content is going to happen during your teen years.
Wow.
So if you're trying to diet too much Diet Coke, too much, and then delaying puberty and all these things, you're actually robbing these children of the moment in life where they're going to lay down the greatest amount of bone health, bone density, bone mineral content. So you're actually starving that bone bank account right away. So we're going to have a generation of kids, even the ones who are just being transitioned early, not for sport, but it's in general. We're going to have a generation of kids who have osteoporosis very early in age. Like, they'll have crumbling backs, crumbling bones and hips, and it'll be just a nightmare for them. So please don't transition your children early. Don't. They need to have their bodies working health and their health.
Yeah. And what, can you talk a little bit about the repercussions also? Because I know girls then go through early onset menopause. I mean, they could be going through menopause at like 16, 7, early ages.
Yeah. Again, it's the bone density. Like, it's just devastating because they'll never have children. They'll be sterilized. Like, they just won't be able to conceive a child, and maybe they don't want to. But the point is, a lot of us know we don't make those decisions. Like, I didn't make that decision until I was in my 30s. Like, I had my children late. So, I mean, some of these girls will suddenly wake up one day when they're 30, 35, 40 and just say, what's the matter with me? I want a child. And it's not going to be possible. Of course, there'll be other ways to do it, adoption and that. But I mean, there's so many more things to sexual and reproductive health than just being able to conceive as well. I mean, you just want to have, again, it's your whole makeup, your whole body. You need to have a healthy body and healthy reproductive system and healthy bones and healthy life. I mean, I'm sorry. And it can't help your mental health if your body is in pain and diminished in any way.
No.
So, this thing that we're doing to children is horrific.
Yeah. I'm glad that the mothers are getting on board. That's what we should be doing. Mothers should be mothers are the protectors of the kids. They're the first
That's
line of defense. I'm
hey,
glad.
mama bears. We got to be mama bears. We got to be protecting because, there's a lot of people out there who are willing to sacrifice our children on the altar of an ideology. And, it's funny because when I was a child, I grew up in South America and I went to these museums and the Inca Empire, which was the, Latin America, and of course, Machu Picchu and all that. But they had child sacrifice, Capacocha. They're called the
Yeah.
children of the Capacocha. And there was a ceremony where if there was like a drought or whatever, and then they'd sacrifice a child to the gods. And I remember looking at this mummified remains of this child because they preserved them in a certain way, and I just kept thinking, what an awful, disgusting thing to do for a culture to do. And now we have our own sort of gender capacochas. Like, we're doing this to our children. We're
Yeah.
doing this, right? We're sacrificing them to our ideology, a new ideology, just like other civilizations did. And we, like anybody like me who thinks that we're so much better than anybody else, needs to rethink that. We need to understand that there's always going to be something, an idea, a wayward thought that gets out of control, and we need to be the protectors of our society. We have to. We have to acknowledge that this is bad and it's evil. It's just, we have to call it out. It's evil. We can't have this happen.
No.
Or at least we should fight against it. So, I think a lot of us agree on that. Doesn't matter which spectrum of which part of the political spectrum you come from, but I think we can all acknowledge you don't harm a child.
Yeah. I mean, it's really ironic to me. I think I don't remember if you know my background, but I used to be an education director for theater, and I worked with kids.
Oh, okay.
I did playwriting and worked with kids doing
Yeah.
all kinds of creative things.
Mm-hmm.
And I always supported kids to be non-conforming, which I think actually sports also really supports kids who are non-conforming.
Well, hey, I was a non-conforming child. I mean, I
Yeah.
tell you that. I was a non-conforming. I mean, man, Ella in my small community was in a evangelical Christian community, but like Bible translators in South America, and we were with a mission, and I was doing sports, and everybody would frown when I'd be playing with soccer in the streets with the boys, and then I got to the national team at 15 years of age, and then I was training on a Sunday morning, and then I'd get on my bike and put my skirt over my shorts, and I'd be all dusty and sweaty and just ride my bike to church and just sit in the back pew and sweating and dusty and everything. And people just looking at me like, and, like the guys would tell, some of the other missionary men would tell my dad, was like, what are you going to do about that girl? And he just say, leave her alone. Just leave her alone.
Good.
That's who she is.
Oh,
So I have a good dad. He's still alive, and it's
you have a good dad.
but he was great. I mean, as far as that, he's like, go get him, whatever, that's you, and so, I mean, for you to encourage nonconformity in a theater setting is absolutely fine. But that doesn't mean that they for real hurt their bodies.
No, and that's the whole crazy thing is, so as soon as I started talking out against kids hurting themselves, I was always like, makeup is just face paint, face paint is neutral, clothes is just fabric is neutral. But I was like, no, you never hurt your body. You should love your body. And you shouldn't deny your sex. I mean, your sex body is simply, it's simply the developmental path that you're on. It's not who you are, it's what you are experiencing. And now, of course, my town thinks I'm a quote danger to kids.
Oh, no, really?
Because I'm the one who doesn't want them to be cut.
We have such an upside down society. It's unbelievable. Well, good for you, Amy, that you're standing strong, because you know what? They're wrong, and they're going to realize one day that you were right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I hope so, and I think so.
Soon, I
Um,
hope. Soon.
yeah. So where do you think the next push is? I mean, I think obviously getting FINA was a huge win. And
Mhm.
what I mean, that was a, that was like if I think of this as like a vast, war, that was a major battle. We staked ground right there.
Right.
What are some of the other, battle points that you see coming up, or where can we focus?
Well, first of all, the consortium that we've created to represent the female voice internationally needs to make sure that every single Olympic sports follows the FINA, more or less, the FINA
Yeah.
narrative guidelines. And we can tweak you know, the young one thing, the statement about younger athletes, but for sure, no males that have gone through puberty. I agree with that. And so basically, we have to make sure that this is the accepted norm,
Yep.
protecting the female athlete category. But the bigger problem is that we need to expand our reach to every country, because much of the domestic, I find that even within Canada, it took me a lot of effort to argue on behalf of females in my sport. Even though World Track and Field has a pretty strong, they're probably going to make their standards eligibility guidelines even stronger
Yeah.
to protect women. We have a group in our country trying to say, well, that's okay for international, but we're going to do our own thing locally and allow like national, domestic, and local competitions be self ID. So it's still got to be fought at the baseline, at the community level. And that's where, where again, I'm going back to my book, it's to get the parents to join the boards of directors of local, yeah, um, local clubs and local sports associations, just to say, look, we're just going to align our policies. Now that if there's a good standard internationally, let's align it with the international policy and not worry, because we just need to keep pressing so that on the ground level this doesn't bubble up again. But I find that leadership at ground level, like where I'm a coach and I'm a local leader, to have a biology based policy at my level is extremely rare in Canada and very important. And the more people hear about what we did in Athletics Alberta to establish sex based sport eligibility category, even for the children and youth, that people are starting to adopt that. And a bunch of associations are taking a look at it in New Zealand and Australia and other places. So
Yeah.
that it's a ground game. It's just like in politics. You have to have a very important a good ground game to make sure that you win and solidify that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And where can people support you? Is there a way that people can support this new organization?
Yes. So it's oh my gosh, now I'm gonna forget well, okay. So go to Coach Blade
Okay.
on Twitter at Coach Blade. And then there's also on Twitter, there's another Twitter site at female underscore female underscore. Let me find it very quickly for you here because I don't want to get it wrong. I'm
Okay.
gonna I'm gonna get it right here. So it is female underscore sport at female
Okay.
underscore sport.
Okay,
And it
great.
has a link. It has a link to sportsconsortium.org is the website.
Okay.
Sports SB, like um, plural, sportsconsortium.org
Okay, great.
is the website. And we're still just starting, so we're gonna have to figure out how to allow people to gain membership. But I think what we're gonna do is the membership can come through the various organizations, like be a member of Save Women's Sports USA, and then you have representation on the consortium, because though,
Yeah.
like Beth is the representative for that group on our consortium.
Okay.
So you need to find the groups within each country. And so in Canada, look up CAUSBAR, Canadian
Yep.
women's sex-based rights. So in that respect, I represent CAUSBAR, which is Women for Sex-Based Rights.
Yeah.
And in the UK, it's Fair Play for Women, right? And then in Spain, it's Save Women's Sports Spain or Contraborado Women's Organization. And so therefore, like if you're whatever country you're in, you look for that organization that's um, representing the female interest, female athletes' interest, and that organization then feeds into our consortium.
Yeah. And
So we are like
well,
an umbrella group of groups.
I love that. I really love that. And will there be any do you know, will there be any future rallies? I mean, we just had a big one here for Title IX in DC that was
Mm-hmm.
great. Do you know,
Awesome.
yeah, do you know if anything else is planned?
Not really, not beyond this icons thing, but I am very sure, Amy, that there will be many in the future, and we will continue because, it's really important, like, especially with the Democrats, like the Republicans, they are all on board with sex-based rights, but like the Democrats seem to have been misled by a small percentage of ideologues, and um, to even go to like some of the, to try to remind the Democrat side, because this is not a Democrat or Republican thing. This is
Yeah,
protecting
yeah,
children, protecting sports. And so to get the other parties on board is extremely important. Because it shouldn't be a partisan issue at all. It should be something we all take for granted in a sense. We all took for granted till 5 minutes ago.
I know.
And so I think that there will be. I don't have anything specifically planned but I think right now we're just still trying to figure out what our next step is as a consortium. Which sport are we going to go visit first and say we want to seat at your table? We're
Yeah.
going to see which one we need to lobby the hardest.
Yeah. How about the lawsuits? Like I know the high school girls had some lawsuits going,
Yeah.
do you think those will have an impact?
Yeah. They will. I think they will. Unfortunately, or fortunately, whatever. I mean, as the political, I would say, as the environment starts to shift and
Yeah.
people start to see what's really happening to kids and to sports and schools, I think there will be more. I would imagine some of these Ivy League girls will probably even end up suing, but it'll take a while because when women sue, it's like huge retrospective
Yeah.
on something that's happened to them. So I think you will see it. It's just that everything's bubbling and we're all starting to talk, and the volume's going up and up and up. And pretty soon there's just going to be this tsunami of actions and lawsuits and like, why did you do this? What happened? Right. And
Yeah.
especially the detransitioners and like everything. I can see this wall tsunami building way out in the Pacific and it's coming across and like, or whatever. But I think there's going to come a day where you're going to see so many things happening against what this ideology did.
I
Um,
think so too.
it's going to make your head spin. You won't even be able to keep up. I'm finding it even harder to keep up now with like the groups coming up and people saying things, I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that I've talked to a few other people about this because I kind of like talk to all the like I talk to like Partners for Ethical Care and parent groups, and I
Yeah.
talk to
Yeah.
like keep women's prison single sex, and I feel like
Exactly.
there's a lot of arms of
Hmm.
this whole thing,
Hmm.
but I think a lot of us can see that I think sports is going to be pivotal. Sports is kind of where it's at because it's not as intimidating, I think, as it is to
Hmm.
talk about child sterilization, even though that maybe is the one that should get people up in arms, or
Yeah.
maybe like women being raped in prison should get people up in arms. But I feel
Yeah.
like they're sort of almost scarier or unapproachable for people to talk about. But I think sports is the thing that is just like capturing people, and they get it. It clicks for some reason.
I agree with you. I mean, I think that sport is the one that is capturing people's attention. I mean, Leah Thomas did us a huge favor in that sense.
He
You
did.
know, like thank you, Leah Thomas.
I know he did.
Um, so I mean, I think it's going to keep happening like that. And then people, that's their entry point. They start with sports, and then they start realizing, then they understand what happened in sport. Then it ripples out to understanding what's happening in the schools about
Yeah.
indoctrination, and what's happening to in prisons and shelters, and what's happening, yeah, especially the children, and what's happening. So I think, yeah, sport is like, because sport is in some ways not the most important thing in the world, it does give you like almost an arm's length thing to look at, and where you can kind of inspect, is this working or not, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
um, so I am well aware, and I've read it again and again this last couple of weeks, that there are women, and I think the women I read this on are people who have accounts for women from the UK, starting to really bug people that it's like everybody cares about sports and nothing else,
Yeah.
in terms of this debate. And I get it. Like, I think there are far more pressing, especially like the women in prisons, and the detransition, or the transitioning of children, and
Yeah.
mutilation of children's bodies. Like, to me, that's way more important than sport. But if sport can be the thing that sort of opens the conversation, then I'm more than happy to be the one speaking, at least amongst the many great women that I've met, like
Yeah.
you and Beth and everybody else. I'm very proud and pleased, and very honored to be part of this first wave of group of people who stood up and is willing to say something, to speak the truth. Reality is going to bite us all. I mean, it's going to be terrible for our whole society to have to deal with basically the fallout from what we've already done. And on
Yeah.
that score, I think Leah Thomas's wins, I would hope that the NC2A would eventually put an asterisk by those marks, disallow any records set, and issue new medals, and compensate, like with new medals or whatever, to the
Yeah.
girls who
I
deserve
hope
those.
so. I hope so.
Um, and so there's going to be compensation sought, I think. But in the meantime, I think sports needs to nip this in the bud, and the NCAA would go a long way in acknowledging a mistake they've made with this year, 2022, and allowing a man to compete with women. And straight up, that's what it was.
Yeah.
And they need to fix this. They need to issue new medals, or medals to the girls, or at least some of, like, even the top 3 or top 8 or whatever. They need to acknowledge that those were all Americans,
Yeah.
and the women who deserved it.
Yeah.
So
And I feel for the girls who never got to perch on that. They never got to take their place.
yeah, yeah. Well, they should be getting a letter of apology. I doubt the NCAA will have that kind of integrity, but one would hope that maybe they could do something to show that they were in error in this year,
Yeah.
and that should never happen again.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Thank you, Linda, so much for being on
Thank you,
with
Amy.
me. You are absolutely an inspiration.
Thank
I
you.
I really appreciate you coming on, and you had so many people are inspired by your work here, and
Thank you.
so many of us have looked to you when we were first getting involved in this conversation. So I really thank you for being a role model, and
Thank
for
you.
holding that line of integrity,
Thank
and
you.
I
Appreciate it.
really I think you're such a great leader. And I just want to honor how I always see you lifting other people up, and you are absolutely the kind of leader that I aspire to be. I also want to be a leader who lifts other people up. And I just see
Thank you.
that in you, and I admire it so much.
That's such a sweet thing to say. Thank you, Amy. I am so honored to be with you and to be with you actually alongside you in this struggle. And I have great admiration too for all of the things you're doing. And you got to be there with Tulsi Gabbard.
No, no, no. I was gonna cheer. I was gonna cheer for a moment. Yeah. No, I
No.
didn't. I didn't. I didn't get to go to DC. I wish I had just. I wish I had just
Oh,
gone.
okay. Yeah. So no, I was gonna say, well, thank goodness though I got to see you in Atlanta and we were
Yeah.
together and
Yeah.
you're gonna do it again.
I know.
And I just Title IX, we've finished the first 50 years and we can all celebrate that.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
would look forward to another 50 years. And I hope that 50 years from now, they look back and say, hey, those women, they stood up. They stood up. People like
Yeah.
Amy and Linda.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
right. Oh, good. Aw.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for talking with me today, and I can't wait to see all that you're doing and up to. Everyone who is
Thank you.
watching, the link to Coach Blade's book is in the show notes, so you can look that up there. And I will put her Twitter handle is also in the show notes, so you'll be able to see that there, and you can see links for all of my other work is also in the show notes. So thank you all who have been watching with us today. And yeah, thank you, Linda.
Well, thank you, Amy. Thank you for everything. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.